Welcome to the Clear-Sighted Career Online Learning Series brought to you by the University of Notre Dame's Alumni Association. My name is Sharon Kane and I serve as Director of Professional and Academic Programs. This webinar is titled Leadership Insights for Your Personal Best. And in fact, this will be a two-parter. So look forward to our tapping the leadership expertise of John Cotter, Jim Kouzes, and Barry Posner, and consolidating their research findings into concise insights for you over the course of these two webinars. We know that Cotter, Kouzes, and Posner have been refining and researching and consulting their take on leadership over decades, and they've distinguished themselves in the process. And in part, they've been able to do that because they ask some big and important questions like, are leaders born or made? What characteristics are most important in our leaders? And why do people follow other individuals? So over the course of this two-part webinar, we will be then providing you with proven, actual leadership models, as well as specific ideas and techniques, and valuable exercises that you can use to reflect and assess for yourself, but also share with those of you who are leading teams as you move along your own leadership journey. I'm pleased to introduce our presenter today, Paul Slaggert, Director of the Steyer Center for Executive Education in the Mendoza College of Business. Paul joined executive education in 2001 and over the last many years has served in a variety of leadership roles. And he's engaged with corporations, nonprofit, and government entities and brought his expertise in the areas of leadership, paradigm shifts, delegation and empowerment, systems thinking, and financial literacy to bear. Prior to joining the University of Notre Dame, Paul served at the University of Cincinnati Center for Management and Executive Development in the business school there. And he earned his BBA in management here at the University of Notre Dame and his MBA in finance at Boston College. Paul, welcome to the Clear-Sighted Career Series, and thanks so much for sharing your expertise.
Oh, thanks, Sharon. It's my pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to join you today. I have the wonderful experience as part of my job to be able to spend a lot of time with people who lead organizations, as Sharon has mentioned, in the for-profit sector, the not-for-profit sector, the government sector. So it's a great pleasure to be able to share some of those ideas and some of that expertise with our alumni and friends as we go through. The title of today's presentation is Leadership Insights for Your Personal Best. So real quickly, I just want to give you a sense of what we're going to try to cover over the next few minutes. The first thing we'll try to take a look at is to define leadership. It's really helpful to have a common definition of what it is we're talking about in order to be able to make the progress we want to. And we're going to talk about the work that Kouzes and Posner have done in their book, The Leadership Challenge, where they've identified 5 key exemplary leadership segments, behaviors that make people really effective as leaders within their organizations. We'll review some of those techniques. We'll give you some ideas and tips about how to do that. But then we're going to talk about the other side of leadership. And in all honesty, I think it's the least discussed piece of leadership. And that's, what does it mean to be a follower within an organization? Because leadership is by definition a relationship, and followership is a voluntary activity. So it's important to be able to understand what that dynamic is and to understand what followers look for in leaders as they go through the process. Then I want to tap into some work that John Cotter has done to be able to talk about where you are. Can we help you identify where you are as a leader and as a manager, and be able to also look at that from an organizational perspective? Because it's important for us to understand what we can do and what our capabilities are. Then we're going to reflect on one of the exercises that Kouzes and Posner did with leaders, a large number of leaders as they put their book together, which is, what's my personal best? When was I at my best as a leader? And can we help you identify what some of those traits and characteristics are as you go through the process, and get a chance to maybe apply some of that model and techniques in your own life? So let's start by talking about leadership, because if we don't have a common definition, it's really hard to talk about a topic, because you're going to be over here, somebody else is going to be over here, and I have a completely different definition of what's going on. And what you'll see is that there are really a lot of very valid definitions of what leadership is. Well, we should take our clue from that means leadership is a complicated thing. And in my experience, actually, what I find is that it's one of those things that people, they know it when they see it, but they have great difficulty in really defining or describing what it is, to put a definition on something as we go. So I put together some of the definitions that I use in some of the programs that I lead with leaders in many different organizations. And you'll see that there's both a breadth here, but there's also some common pieces as you go through. One of the definitions that I actually like a lot is from my friend Pete Delisle. Sharon and I have had the opportunity to work with Pete over many years here at Notre Dame. And Pete works with a lot of groups that we bring on campus through the Stayer Center for Executive Education. I've known Pete for over 25 years, so I'm a little biased in that regard. But I like his definition because he says leadership is the ability to influence without authority. Actually, it's with or without authority. Because if you report to me, I have authority over you. The hardest part is to lead without authority. How do I influence a group of people to accomplish a common goal? That's what we want to be able to do. But these are all really valid definitions of what leadership is. The one that I like best, actually, is the one that John Cotter has put together in his book called A Force for Change. I've had the opportunity, actually, to not only sit in on a program with Cotter, but to be able to spend time talking with him about how he puts his programs together, how he works with managers and leaders in organizations to be able to get them to become more effective leaders. It's a little bit long definition. I have a really shorthand version of this that I use in the programs that I run. And I basically say that what a leader does is to move an organization forward. And you'll see that that's in this longer definition that we provided for you on what Cotter says a leader does. But there are two really key components in that definition. And one is there's a direction. When I say moving an organization forward, I mean moving that way to get better than we are today. That's what a leader wants to be able to do. But there's also a time dimension buried in that definition because it's future oriented. It's something I can't accomplish just today. So if I want to get better as an organization, if I want to move my organization forward, then I know that's going to take time. But the other thing that has to be understood as part of this is what I'm asking you to do as a follower is to go someplace you've never gone before. So there's a challenge, there's a risk in there. I'm asking you to be able to go to do things you've never done before. And there's risk associated with that. So understanding all of those things is really important when we talk about leadership, because you're starting to get a sense of how complex this is. I ask people who attend my seminars all the time, do they have enough people in their organizations who are good leaders? Unfortunately, the answer is almost always no. And if you look at surveys of major leadership groups, you'll find that the need for leaders within organizations and the ability to have people ready to assume leadership positions when the organization needs it is one of the things that keeps CEOs up at night. So we know there's a problem there. We know that there is the ability to get better. So we need to merge those things. There's a need out there. There's the ability to develop and to get better. And if we can develop people who are more effective leaders, we can have an impact across many organizations. And that's what we try to do. As you know, the Mendoza College of Business has a concept called Ask More. It's actually ask more of business, ask more of yourself. And there are three components within that are important to understand. The first is individual integrity. How do I get better at what I do? How do I develop myself? How do I accomplish what I tell people I am committing to do? That's all individual integrity. The next piece is organizational effectiveness. How do I take those skills, that knowledge, my expertise, and positively impact my organization? How do I help the people who work for me get better at what they do? The third piece of the ask more is actually the hardest thing to do, is greater good. How do I take that and make sure that we have a positive impact beyond my organization, whether it's in my personal life, whether it's in the work that I do with my volunteer activities? How do I make sure that my organization fulfills its commitments, pays attention to how it interacts with its constituencies? How do we deal with sustainability? A whole lot of issues like that, but it's to have an impact beyond yourself. We think by helping people become better leaders, we can do all three of those things. So let's take a look for a little bit at what Kouzes and Posner found. The book, The Leadership Challenge, is now well over 20 years old, and it's got fantastic, really good, solid insights. But what I really liked about the work that Kouzes and Posner did when they did this book was they didn't say, here's our theory of leadership, and we're now going to go out and try and prove it. What they actually did was they talked to people who were in leadership positions and in leadership roles and said, tell me about a time when you were really effective as a leader. They talked about 400 or 500 people to be able to do. They surveyed this. They went had some in-depth interviews with people, because what they wanted to find out then is, what are the commons? What are the themes that come out from real leadership experiences? And from that, they were able to say, we see some things that are common to all of these stories as we go through the process. So there are 5 leadership practices, and within each of those practices, there are 2 specific techniques that they want people to be able to be aware of in someone who's an effective leader. And the perspective that they take is, they think that exemplary leaders can make exemplary organizations. So it's not just the basics, it's how do we get our organizations to become better as we move ahead? How do we get the people who work for me to get better at what they do? So the 5 pieces that we're going to look at are: challenge the process, inspire a shared vision, enable others to act, model the way, and encourage the heart. So within the challenge the process, what we want to do is to search for opportunities and to be able to experiment and to take risks. It's interesting because I will use this exercise with leaders within the programs that I do, and we'll have them do the same process Kouzes and Posner did, which is to describe when I was at my personal best as a leader. And this first piece is important because one of the things I ask them is, the leadership experience that you have shared, did you volunteer for that, or was it given to you? And a large number of people said, I saw something that needed to change, and I stepped up. I honestly believe that that is the biggest difference between people who lead and people who choose not to lead, is the willingness to step forward and say, something needs to get better, something needs to change. I want to step up and make that happen. But when you do that, what you're doing is you're challenging the status quo. You're saying, everything's not quite what it needs to be. We are better than this. We can do better than this. So what they do is they step forward and they're looking for opportunities to make a change. But it's very much challenging the status quo, because that's what you need to be able to do. Everybody can sit back and be happy with the way the world works, because if I do it this way, I've always done it this way, this is what's going to happen. That's very safe for people to be able to do. That doesn't work in today's environment. Change is everywhere. Organizations are being challenged by known competitors, unknown competitors, new competitors. So the ability to be able to search for opportunities is critically important to someone who wants to lead. And it's part of that process of moving an organization forward as you do this, because we say, I don't want to stay where we are. We can be better at this. How can we get someplace else as we go through this? Well, what that also means is I've got to look for new ways of doing things. So a big key for this, clearly, as you can imagine, is the area of innovation. How can we innovate? Most people say, well, innovation is 2 things. It's product or it's service. There are actually probably at least 10 different things that you can innovate on. Business models, business processes, all of those things. So you need to look at the world differently. But the key is that as the leader, I don't necessarily have to be the one that comes up with the idea. The people who are closest to the work know a lot about what's going on. They have great ideas, How do I, as the leader, give them voice? How do I tap into their expertise and their knowledge to be able to help them move ahead? What I have to be able to do is create the environment where that can happen. That's how I lead. So both of those are really big components of challenging the process. The next piece is, how do I inspire a shared vision? Because I want to be able to say, this is where we want to go. And I want to create an environment where people say, yes, we need to be able to go there. So I have to be able to say what that is. I can't just keep it in my head. So not only do I have to know where it is I want to be able to take my organization, but I have to be able to articulate that in a way that people will say, yes, I want to be able to do that. Well, I've already tipped off what the second specific technique is, which is enlisting others. I can't lead if people don't choose to follow. It's really interesting that when I talk about personal best with the groups, I ask them to share stories in small groups, and then to do what Kouzes and Posner did, which is to identify what are the common themes that you heard in all of these stories. And then we'll debrief that. And I make a very specific point to say, there is something that I see in all of your definitions, and it's a single word. Now, they don't always just use this word, but the concept is buried there. And it's the single word of we. Because I can't lead if no one is going to follow. It's a group activity. Actually, the first time that I ever did the personal best exercise was with a group of 12 or 13 senior managers leading a manufacturing company that was outside of Cincinnati. And part of this was a team building activity. We were in a large room and everybody was sitting at a large conference table. And we literally went person to person telling the story. And the person who was actually at the far end of the table opposite from me told his story, and then we went on. But you know how when somebody tells a story, something falls funny on your ear, and you can't quite identify what it was that didn't sound right? And I couldn't figure it out that day. So I tell people, or I ask people, when do you do your best thinking? And people are really good about this. They'll say, oh, when I'm going for a run, when I'm walking the dog, when I'm cutting the grass, when I'm standing in the shower. Your mind is working and we're not aware of it. And all of a sudden, the answer kind of pops out. So about 3 days later after this experience, all of a sudden I realized what was so bothersome about the story that one person told me. Never once in his entire story did he use the word we. The only pronoun he ever used was I. The difficulty or the tragedy in the story was he was president of this organization. That's really important to understand. It's not about me. It's about accomplishing what this vision is, and it's getting other people to willingly say, yes, this is where I want to be able to go. Well, in order to do that, as the leader, I need to be able to enable other people to act. I have to be able to not only get them to say, yes, I want to do this, but I have to get them actively involved in the process. So fostering collaboration is the first of the techniques that you want to be able to use to do this. We are, by our nature, competitors. The problem is, it's really unseemly, unproductive to compete with people within my own organization. I want to compete with people who are outside. I want to compete with competitors. I want to be able to collaborate with people within my organization. Because in the roles we have as leaders within our organizations, our job is to make the best decisions for the organization as a whole, and that's spelt with a W. We forget that we all work for the same place. That when we used to get a paycheck, that the payee was our company or our organization, because we act like we work in different places and that we're competing within an organization. We have to learn to be able to collaborate to get the best decisions made for the organization as a whole. And the other thing is I have to give people skills and capabilities, and I have to encourage them along the way. So I have to strengthen them. I have to teach them. I have to give them small things so they can develop one step at a time as we go through the process. The next piece is to model the way. Anyone in a leadership position needs to understand this, that everyone who works for them or everyone who is following them pays really, really, really close attention to what they do. everybody thinks they can do their boss's job better than their boss can do that. You think the same thing as you go through the process. I know this because I talk to people about it all the time. People pay attention to what you do. They pay more attention to what you do than what you say. And it's very difficult if you're a leader to find yourself in a situation when you say, I'm going to do this, but then your behavior does this, because that dissonance will be found out like that with the people who are trying to accomplish what it is you want them to do. So setting the example is really important. This is where values come into play. You need to live your values. If you have organizational values, you need to make sure that you model those, that you don't say, this is what we value as an organization, but then everybody sees that bad behavior is what's actually encouraged because those are the people getting promoted, those are the people getting new opportunities, those are the people getting the raises. That is death knell to an organization. You need to be able to pay attention to that. You need to be aware of the impact that you have as a leader. And living out your values is where this happens to be within the practice of leadership. But it also means you have to know what your values are. And you have to know whether your personal values are in alignment with organizational values. If they're not, you know it. You may not be able to articulate it, but you feel it. There's a dissonance that you have. And you need to be able to understand what that is, because modeling the way is critically important to someone who leads. People will find out very quickly if you're a charlatan. And as a leader, to be effective, they have to be able to put their trust in you. This is where we also start talking about integrity. Do I do what I say I'm going to do? You can start to see how complicated this leadership thing becomes. And it really is. That's not a discouragement. That's an opportunity for us to be able to figure out, how do I become more effective as a leader as I go through the process? Now, if I'm leading an organization forward, remember I said there's a time dimension to that. It's a future-oriented, which means it's going to take a while for us to get there. So what I have to be able to do also is to make sure that I recognize the progress along the way. So pick those low-hanging fruit. Let us say, I've got some easy wins, because if I'm moving an organization forward, by definition, I'm asking people to change. So in order to build momentum, to be able to get some of the naysayers out of the way, I need to let people know we're making progress and we're actually going along the way. So making sure you plan small wins is important. It's especially important, don't wait until you get to the end to be able to say, good job, because people will get worn out and they'll get discouraged as they go along, which leads to the fifth practice, which is encourage the heart. How do I recognize individual contributions? It is a team, but everybody contributes differently. And that's an important thing to remember. When you put teams together, when you're trying to get an organization to move ahead, you want to tap into the breadth of diversity of experience, ideas, perspectives, expertise that exists within your organization. Don't just take people who think like you do, because you'll suboptimize your decision-making all along the way. But you want to be able then to recognize what people do to contribute to your organization as you go. Then you want to celebrate. And you can be creative. It can be a pizza party. It can be bringing in the chair massage person on a Friday afternoon. It can be jeans day as you go through the process. A good friend of mine was a VP of HR for an insurance company in Cincinnati. And they'd gone through a process where they had identified what are the values, what makes us as a company different, what does it take to be successful here. And Steve was trying to find a way to be able to encourage the heart. And I think he came up with a really simple and really effective way to do this. He went to the bank and bought a whole bunch of silver dollars. And what he did is, when he caught somebody exhibiting one of the behaviors, he rewarded them, but he just didn't give them the silver dollar. He told them what they were doing, why he was encouraging them, what was the behavior they exhibited, because he wanted to make sure he reinforced that. But then he gave them a choice, because he said, now with the silver dollar I'm giving you, you have a choice. You can keep that as recognition of what you've done, or you can give it to somebody else that you catch living out one of the behaviors that we think is important here. They were trying to impact and affect the culture of the organization. An interesting happened, he says. People wanted two. They wanted 2 silver dollars because they wanted the recognition of their own, and they wanted to be able to pass one on. So you can see this isn't an expensive thing. This is a really creative way to be able to do that. So leaders need to be able to do all of these things as they go through the process. So that gives you at least an overview of what I think leadership is, and it taps into the work that Kouzes and Posner have done to say leaders need to do these things. And I think if you're honest with yourself, when you've been in a really good position as a leader, you're going to see you've done these things, maybe very naturally, maybe inadvertently, maybe with thought or with forethought. It doesn't matter. You've done those things as you go. Those are the commons that come out in the stories people tell about when they were effective as a leader. It's really important though to flip. Remember, I already told you that followership is a voluntary activity. So it's important to understand, how would the people who work for me or who choose to follow me, how would they describe what they think their ideal leader is? So Kouzes and Posner, as part of the process they did in the Leadership Challenge, was to basically put together 20 characteristics or attributes. I ask people to be able to, in small groups, is to prioritize these 1 to 20. I don't have them do 20. We never have that much time to be able to do that. But I want them to be able to identify what they think are the most important ones. So you'll be able to see what those 20 characteristics are. Ambitious, broad-minded, caring, competent, cooperative, honest, imaginative. It's a broad range of things. And what I ask people to do is, in effect, to say, you fill this out from a perspective of who would you willingly follow? Because that gives you a sense then of the leader you probably should want to be. Now, as you go through this, these are all really good things. Whatever you rank as number 20 doesn't mean it's not important or it wouldn't make somebody a really good leader. What this to me actually shows is how difficult it is to be an effective leader. In all honesty, if you could do 5, 6, or 7 of these things really, really well, people would willingly follow you. Does it matter which ones those are? Well, I think the answer is both yes and no. Kouzes and Posner have found over time, because they've surveyed thousands of people in being able to do this. These are their top 7. Consistently, as they talk to people, honesty came out as number 1. Well, I think honesty is really important. If you're not honest, if you don't have integrity, if you don't have character, people will not trust you. People don't trust you, they will not follow you. They also need to make sure that you are competent. When we talk about competence, it's important to understand that there's a difference between being not competent, because that means I can fix that, I can learn, I can pick up skills and capabilities and experiences so I can become competent, versus incompetent. If you've ever worked for somebody who's incompetent, you know how horrible that is, how frustrating that is. But there's a difference between being incompetent and not competent. Think of your kids when they first learned how to play soccer or baseball or lacrosse or ice hockey, whatever it happens to be. They weren't very good. You laughed at them in good-natured ways because they were funny and they're fun to watch. But over time, as they got better, as they built competence, how you watch them becomes very different, because you start looking for other things. And the impact that they have once they become competent is very noticeable as you go through the process. So actually the first 4, between honesty and competence, forward-looking, gets back to Cotter's definition of moving an organization forward. I need to be able to look ahead. And inspiring, which is part of the vision piece that Kouzes and Posner talk about. Kouzes and Posner say those 4 things are really important. And what they do is a leader needs those because they create this concept they call credibility. If I can do those 4 things, I am a credible leader and someone will follow me. This is a really long list. It's really difficult for somebody to say, I can do all 20 of these things really well. And you don't have to do all 20 of those things really well, but you have to do a bunch of them really well. And whatever you don't do well, what a good leader really does is to find people who do what they don't do to supplement them.
Paul, thank you so much for giving
You're welcome,
insights and really consolidating in an effective way what the greats like Cotter and Kouzes and Posner have learned and revealed about leadership and followership. So thank you so much for this
Welcome.
part one of Leadership Insights for your personal best.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
So I take this opportunity to thank those of you who have joined us for this webinar, Leadership Insights for Your Personal Best Part 1, and encourage our alumni to tap into other resources provided by the university's Alumni Association. Those include the my.nd.edu/career website, where you'll find resources, services, programs, and other tools for your use. Secondly, you can contact our career advisor at career@alumni.nd.edu. Thank you.